Hello, lovers of Westeros. I'm Ashley of Noth, and today I'm finally presenting you with the conclusion of my Pink Letter Whodunit series. This video is long overdue. I apologize for that, so let's get straight to it. If you're interested in my take and my personal pick for the author of the Pink Letter, just keep watching. I'm about to tell you why Melisandre is guilty as charged. First, let's take a look at the evidence for Melisandre being the author. One obvious example is that Melisandre knows about Stannis' magic sword as she gives theatrical presentations designed around it. In my opinion, the most obvious reason is that the author gave very specific information, some of which only 3 people in the entire story knew. Melisandre is one of those 3 people. Melisandre knows that Mance was spared and that another was glamored to look like Mance and burned in his place. It was Melisandre's idea to do this, and she did the glamoring. Mel also knew about Mance's mission to rescue Arya from Winterfell because, again, it was her idea. Mel knew Mance took spearwives with him to Winterfell because Mance said he was going to in front of her. Melisandre also knows about Val and about Mance's baby because they're all living at the Wall. In fact, Melisandre tells Jon that they can trust Mance because they have his son. Next, I'd like to take a look at some particular verbiage in the Pink Letter. The author uses the phrase false king 4 times in the Pink Letter, though it is in reference to Stannis, but it's not the name that's important, it's the phrase. Melisandre is the only character who uses the phrase false king. The Boltons and Wyman Manderly say either Lord Stannis or Stannis Baratheon. In Tywin Lannister's exchanges with Bowen Marsh, the phrase usurper was used. I say all this to say that the words false king being used 4 times in the letter and Martin singling out just Melisandre to use the phrase is no coincidence. In fact, these 2 words, false king, are actually what tipped me off that Mel is the mysterious author when I started doing research for the series. Now, another phrase in the Pink Letter I'd like to look at is red whore, which is used to describe Melisandre. You might be thinking, why would Melisandre refer to herself like that? If she were pretending to be Ramsay or anybody else for that matter, Mel would have to echo the common sentiment towards herself so as not to arouse suspicion. And Melisandre's reputation ain't nothing nice, so calling herself a whore and a witch isn't too far off the mark. There's also the matter of the author proclaiming Stannis and his army defeated, slaughtered in 7 days of battle. We know this detail to be false thanks to the A Dance with Dragons epilogue, so we're left wondering, would Melisandre lie on Stannis? Normally, no, but in this instance, when she's trying to sound like someone else, particularly Stannis' enemy, then yes. But more importantly, Mel needs Jon to decide to march on Winterfell. So long as Stannis is alive and his army is engaging the Boltons, Jon won't decide to do it himself. Now, keep in mind, Melisandre doesn't actually want Jon to fight the Boltons. She wants him to decide and declare publicly that he's going to. We'll touch back on this momentarily, but keep it in mind. Okay, so now we've qualified Melisandre as the author by demonstrating her knowledge of the details in the Pink Letter. Next, we need to understand Mel's motives for writing it. Remember, if you will, that in the other videos I've done in this series, I posed the question, did the author of the Pink Letter intend to use it as a pretext for murder, a tool to further a conspiracy, or something else entirely? In this case, in Melisandre's case, it's a mix of 2 of those things. It's my belief that Melisandre wrote the Pink Letter to give others a pretext to murder Jon so that she could resurrect him. Crazy, right? I gave you one motive which undoubtedly left you seeking another. Why would Melisandre write a letter with the goal of getting Jon killed so she could resurrect him? This is a multi-part answer. First, Melisandre tends to be very incompetent. So the Pink Letter was a way for Mel to create a circumstance that enabled her vision to come to pass. Second, Melisandre could have used the Pink Letter as a means to deliver Azor Ahai into the world. It's a lot to wrap one's head around, but hear me out. Let's look at the first motive, incompetence. Melisandre is probably the least competent Red Priest or Priestess in A Song of Ice and Fire, though she credits herself as the best in her order at interpreting the flames. Oftentimes, her personal agenda clouds her interpretation of what she sees, so things don't occur in the manner she tells people if they occur at all. So Mel's solution is to create a scenario that enables her visions to come true. The first time she did it was with Renly. Melisandre tells Stannis that she saw Renly's doom. Then she later tells Stannis that he'd win the best part of Renly's power if he went to Storm's End, which is what happened. However, Davos points out the problem here. He says, Lord Renly only came here because you had laid siege to the castle. He was marching towards King's Landing before against the Lannisters. Then Stannis further confirms the problem by telling Davos, Melisandre saw another day in her flames as well. A morrow when Renly rode out of the south in his green armor to smash my host beneath the walls of King's Landing. Had I met my brother there, it might have been me who died in place of him. Again, Davos points out how erroneous this is because, as he says, if Melisandre saw two futures, both cannot be true. So, as opposed to just letting events play out naturally, Melisandre convinces Stannis to go to Storm's End because this would draw Renly there, which would in turn allow Melisandre's vision of his doom to occur because he was close enough to get got by that shadow assassin. Melisandre also does this in A Dance with Dragons. She gets a vision of a girl in gray on a dying horse fleeing a marriage. Melisandre assumes this girl is Jon's sister fleeing her arranged marriage to Ramsay, coming north to Jon for protection. She tells this to Jon, only the girl doesn't come, so Melisandre concocts a scheme to glamour and spare Mance, whom she would send to Winterfell to rescue Arya and bring her back to the Wall. If Jon's sister was already going to be coming north, why is this covert rescue mission necessary? Because this is what Melisandre does. She created the situation that would make Arya flee so she could sit back and say what was in the flames came to pass. So, if Mel has already done all of this, why wouldn't she forge a letter to precipitate other visions? Mel has seen a variety of things in the flames pertaining to Jon that haven't come to pass. Writing this letter would trigger them. At one point, Mel saw Jon as a man, then a wolf, then a man again. Then she sees skulls surrounding Jon, she sees enemies were all around him, daggers in the dark. Mel interprets the skulls to mean death, so it stands to reason that she would surmise that Jon would get stabbed to death. Now, if Mel wrote this letter, she'd also have to know it was various Watch brothers that would do the stabbing and not some enemy Jon would encounter later. We know Mel does know this because at one point, while warning Jon, she offered to give Jon the names of said enemies. What's the one way members of the Watch would turn on their Lord Commander? If that Lord Commander were to compromise the Watch's neutrality by leading an army against a noble house, because the Night's Watch takes no part. So by writing the pink letter and getting Jon to decide to take a wildling army south, Mel created the opportunity for Jon's enemies to kill him. Had Jon not got that letter, he wouldn't have decided to march on Winterfell and his brothers wouldn't have reason to kill him. Now, I'd also like to note that Mel would have also surmised that Jon would be resurrected because she saw the man to wolf to man transition, but I'll touch on that momentarily. First, I'd like to point to a conversation Mel has with Jon that hints the pink letter is coming. In A Dance with Dragons, Mel attempts to dissuade Jon from going through with the Hardhome ranging, claiming the ships he'd already sent won't come back, that the people there can't be saved, she's seen it in her flames, and Jon gets annoyed by this, so he tells her, your fires have been known to lie. And Melisandre says, I have made mistakes, I have admitted as much, but Jon cuts her off and says, a gray girl on a dying horse, daggers in the dark, a promised prince born in smoke and salt. It seems to me that you make nothing but mistakes, my lady. Where is Stannis? What of Rattleshirt and his spear wives? Where is my sister? All your questions shall be answered. Look to the skies, Lord Snow, and when you have your answers, send to me. Winter is almost upon us now, and I am your only hope. By look to the skies, Melisandre means a raven will come with a letter that will answer Jon's questions. We can assume she saw that in her flames, But as is the case with the other things she'd seen, no letter was coming. So Mel had to again take matters into her own hands. This wouldn't have been hard to do because Jon, by asking the questions he did, gave Mel her talking points, so she knew just what to say in the letter to sway Jon. Speaking of the pink letter itself, the last thing I'd like to note about it is the handwriting. We know that Jon's previous letter from Ramsay, and Asha Greyjoy's for that matter, were both written in a, quote, large, spiky hand. When Jon reads the pink letter, he doesn't note the penmanship to be large and spiky. In fact, he makes no mention of it at all. This leads me to think that the handwriting was clear, legible, and on the nice side. What type of person tends to have this sort of handwriting? A woman. And I lied. The last thing I'd like to mention with regards to the letter is the meeting in which Jon read the letter. After Jon reads the pink letter in the Shield Hall and the Free Folk agree to march south, Jon notices Melisandre was one of the first to leave before the ale was served. It's as though she stayed long enough to make sure the pink letter did its job and then ducked out to prepare for the next phase of the plan. Let's bring this thing back around to resurrection. I claimed that one of Melisandre's goals with the pink letter was to precipitate Jon's death so that she could resurrect him. You might be thinking this is a huge risk to take and subsequently questioning why Melisandre would gamble with Jon's life. She has never resurrected anyone, so blind faith in her ability to do it with Jon is kinda crazy. However, if we look deeper, it's really not so crazy. Let's look at one of Mel's visions which hinted at Jon Snow's resurrection. As Mel desperately searched the flames for another vision of the gray girl on the dying horse, among several things, Mel sees the following. The flames crackled softly, and in their crackling she heard the whispered name Jon Snow. His long face floated before her, limned in tongues of red and orange. Now he was a man, now a wolf, now a man again. But the skulls were here as well. The skulls were all around him, daggers in the dark. As I've touched on, Melisandre thinks the skulls represent death. So if she saw Jon surrounded by death, by enemies with daggers, and saw a man to wolf to man transition, then she would surmise that Jon would get stabbed to death, warg the wolf, then come back to life. The only way one returns from the dead is with resurrection. Melisandre knew this would happen prior to writing the pink letter, so she need not feel so much guilt over precipitating Jon's death, because he wasn't going to stay dead. Now we understand that Melisandre knew a resurrection would take place, but a question remains. How did she know she could do it since she'd never had this skill before? Well, as she's preparing for her meeting with Rattleshirt Mance, Mel takes mental stock of her magical supplies and has the following thought. The carved chest that she had brought across the narrow sea was more than 3/4 empty now. And while Melisandre had the knowledge to make more powders, she lacked many rare ingredients. My spells should suffice. She was stronger at the wall, stronger even than in Ahai. Her every word and gesture was more potent, and she could do things that she had never done before. So, if Melisandre is now stronger than she's ever been, and she's gaining new powers, and she's seen that Jon will get resurrected, why wouldn't Melisandre believe that she could do it? You might be wondering why Melisandre would even bother. Who is Jon to her? Remember in the beginning, when establishing goals for writing the pink letter, I said Melisandre would be willing to precipitate murder and a subsequent resurrection if she thought she'd be delivering Azor Ahai into the world? That's my answer. Jon isn't just a random Lord Commander, he's Azor Ahai. It's my belief that Melisandre has finally gotten off the Stannis train and realized Jon is the real deal. Let's take a look at a few visions Mel gets that suggests this could be the case. One morning, as she's being attended by Devon asks Mel what she saw in her flames the previous night. Before answering, Mel thinks, skulls. 1,000 skulls and the bastard boy again, Jon Snow. Mel then reflects on how hard it is to read the flames, how hard she'd worked at doing it, and that there was no one in her order who was as skilled at this gift as her. Sidebar, she's actually the least competent red priest or priestess in the story. That she thinks so highly of herself is laughable. Clearly, Melisandre has never met Makaro, but I digress. She has these thoughts, then thinks, "Yet now she could not even seem to find her king. I pray for a glimpse of Azor Ahai, and Rolor shows me only snow." A time later, during Alice Karstark in the Magnar's wedding festivities, Melisandre remarks that Patchface is dangerous, that she's glimpsed him in her flames many times, and sometimes Patches is surrounded by skulls with blood on his mouth. Jon asks why is it that she can see fools in her flames, but nothing of Stannis, and Melisandre tells Jon, "When I search for him, all I see is snow." The two go back and forth about what Mel can and can't see in the flames, and Melisandre also tells Jon, "I am seeing skulls. And you. I see your face every time I look into the flames." Now, we know that the first thing Melisandre looks for is Stannis every single time, while saying things like, "Show me Stannis, Lord. Show me your king. Show me your instrument." While I've questioned Mel's competence as a Red Priestess, I've never questioned her intellect. Surely, after asking Rolor for a glimpse of Azor Ahai every day and never seeing Stannis, but only seeing Jon or Snow, Melisandre would have to put two and two together and realize that she's been mistaken all this time. What was it she told Jon when he questioned her about the Grey Girl vision? The vision was a true one. It was my reading that was false. If Melisandre has already come to this conclusion once, why couldn't she do it again? Especially when it pertains to something as significant as the savior of mankind. It's my belief that Melisandre finally did wise up, as we saw her do in the show, and she did what was necessary to precipitate Azor Ahai's rebirth. You can bet the resurrection will involve salt and smoke, though one could argue Bowen Marsh's saltwater tears and Jon's smoking wounds fill the criteria of the prophecy. Mel having come to this conclusion is also supported by the pink letter itself. In it, Stannis is referred to as false king 4 times. If Mel realized Jon was Rolor's king and not Stannis, it would make sense for Melisandre to refer to Stannis as false. Now that we've reviewed all of the reasons in favor of Mel being the author, in the spirit of transparency, we should look at the reasons against her being the author. Honestly, there's only one objection I can come up with. Reek. Melisandre would have no way to know about him. We aren't told that she's seen Reek in the flames, heard the name whispered, etc. But for her to have included the detail, I assume she has, and we just don't know how she knows it. Not yet, at least. And here is where I leave you. I really hope you enjoyed this books-based series of videos. Now that we won't get the show until 2019, this channel will shift primarily to book-based videos. If there's someone you think I've missed that could have wrote the pink letter, let me know down in the comments who that is and why. If you'd like to see a video on whoever you think did write the pink letter, let me know. I'm more than open to doing that as well. I'm Ashley of Noth. Please give this video a thumbs up if you did like it, subscribe, and join my Khalasar. To my Blood Riders, my Khalasar, and everyone watching, I hope you have an excellent day, and from me to you, 7 blessings, friends.